Hello and welcome to Dojo Live this Tuesday, February 6, 2024. My name is Kim Lantis, and it's my pleasure to be hosting along today with co-host Rodrigo Vargas, who is the VP of Generative AI at Encora, and one of Encora's machine learning engineers, Ana Robles. Thank you for helping me today, guys, in this conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, because it's going to be a great one as we dive in with our guest today, Viren Baraiya, who is co-founder of Orkes. I apologize, Viren. I've been calling you Orkes this entire time. It is Orkes, and we're so happy to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here.
Yes. Viren, today we're going to be talking all about how generative AI is impacting the way software is built, diving into how developers are weaving Gen AI models into their business workflows. But before we do, we'd really like to get to know you a bit better, your story, your passion, and what sort of led up to co-founding Orkes, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, my name is Viren. I'm one of the co-founders at Orkes. Prior to founding Orkes, I have spent like almost a decade working mainly around kind of developer products. I spent a few years at Google before joining Orkes, which is where I spent time on Firebase and Google Play, both developer products. Prior to that, I was at Netflix, which is where I, along with my co-founders, created Conductor. And the open source Conductor, never kind of realizing where that is going to go forward, but that was kind of something that we did. And then my roots prior to kind of working in the tech are in the Wall Street. So I spent almost half a decade working at Goldman Sachs in tech, but again focusing on internal developer products. So yeah, one of my passion is definitely building products that are used by developers, the platforms used by developers. And I always found it to be very interesting and very challenging, right? Like, when you think about developers, as developers, we are very opinionated. Our needs are very kind of unique in some ways, right? Like, and when a product works for you, it acts as a multiplier because, it gets used by, if not hundreds, millions of developers in cases like Firebase, for example. And like, the productivity gain that you can be responsible can be really large. So, this is an interesting space. And this was also one of the reasons why we founded Orkes. Seeing that this is a space that is really interesting compared to everything else that I've seen so far.
I think it's interesting, and your approach. It sounds like you're successful when you've worked yourself out of a job.
Yes.
And then it's okay. Got to find the next job. I love it. I love it. So tell us a bit about Orkes and the problem that you are solving for developers.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as I mentioned, right, like when you think about approach to building software, there are you typically when you look at, for example, large tech companies, take for example Google or Netflix or Meta, there tend to be kind of three layers to building the software. You have the core infrastructure, running data centers and databases and a whole bunch of things around it. At the top layer, you have the consumer apps or the enterprise apps that are essentially kind of used by us like on a daily basis. What comes in the middle is the product infrastructure, which is what is used by the developers to kind of build their products. So take, for example, let's say if you are a developer at Google and you build an API, you don't really have to worry about how this API is going to scale to handle, the planet scale, right? It will be automatically designed and platformized, so to speak, to be able to handle billions of requests every second. Now, this kind of platforms are typically not available to every other company. And the approach that you take is like you make the best out of what productivity tools that you have, right? Like you end up using infrastructure that is available, products that are available for developer infrastructure, and you try to build yourself. But typically, that's not the core mission for your company, right? You are solving a very specific business use case. If you are a bank, you want to serve your customers the best. If you are in a retail and e-commerce, you want to probably optimize your supply chain, give the best experience to the consumers and everything. So this becomes more like a necessity, but not something that you really want to invest in. And this is where we build Orkes to be that platform that allows companies and developers inside the companies to build their applications with a lot more reliability, scale, and more importantly, go to market fast. Right? In the end, what really matters is how fast can you go to market with your idea. And that's where we want to kind of make an impact.
Very, very cool. So it sounds like you get the ease that behemoths like Google, Meta, and elsewhere have, but for the smaller companies.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily smaller companies, right? Even if you look at large enterprises, you all need the same thing. It's just that, there's no point reinventing stuff that has always been reinvented. The reason why you are moving to cloud, and the reason why you would not build your own database, you should not be building your own platform. You should just use the platform.
I love it. So let's dive into the nitty gritty, this buzzword that's been happening over the past year plus, and that's generative AI. So what's your experience at Orkes, and how are you utilizing generative AI to build software? And of course, not just you as a company, but the way that you're seeing this work out for individuals and developers as well. And of course, Rodrigo, Anna, jump in here. Let's get the conversation started.
Yeah, I think generative AI has been kind of an interesting space, right? Like we have seen that going from the early versions of ChatGPT to what it is today, and it has been kind of the amount of kind of investment, amount of kind of product iterations that we have seen. It has been kind of unprecedented, right, in some sense. And what essentially started as like a very good experiment on ChatGPT, right? I think it is starting to be very clear, right? Like it has kind of profound implications on how you build software, one as a developer and also as a company, right? As an organization, when you think about building a software, what kind of software you are going to be building, how the interface is going to look like. And when we think about Gen AI, right? In my opinion, the AI is missing the middle part, which is the G, right? Because eventual goal there is to get to artificial general intelligence. And as you get closer to it, right, it has an opportunity to be able to kind of redefine how you even kind of envision your software to be. Today, with, for example, and in some sense, you only see the bits and pieces of it when you use a Copilot on GitHub or your IDE, right? It predicts what you want to do, or if you kind of looking at the code, it gives you suggestions, right? So it's kind of changing the interface in some ways in terms of how you kind of work with Gen AI. There is no, it's just there, right? Like it's there as a co-pilot, as that rubber duck that is always there, kind of helping you think about what to do next. Now, if you take that approach and translate that, or kind of transpose that into how you build a business applications. So today, when you want to build an app for your kind of solving a business use case, you typically think about the user interface. You have kind of specific ways to kind of work with the software and everything. But if you reimagine that to be more like a conversational piece, and then it changes also the interface, how that is going to work. And we are starting to see that with things like early versions of copilots, which are very specific. Like you can talk to your database and get answers. You can talk to your kind of other systems and get answers which is very specific to business, right? Or generate automatic graphs and things like that. But I think that's one area where I see things are going to evolve and change how we even think about building the software, what kind of software that we build.
So, Viren, this is a rapidly changing landscape. In 6 months, 12 months down the road, this landscape could be completely reshaped. And where we talked about creating software, I'm going back to the main topic that we're discussing, how Gen AI impacts the way we build software, developers build software. Have you seen, based on your experience, that these promises that Gen AI brings to the table hold true and the actual work engineers do?
So far, not as much. Like, to be honest, right? Like, of course, there are places where, so yes and no. Like in the sense that, like a lot of times, we used to go to, on the internet, Google search a question, right? Now, you could just ask a ChatGPT. A very good example is when I wanted to convert my unit test from one language to another, I just give it to GPT-4 and say, here is my unit test written in Python. Give me the C# version of the same thing. Copy pasted, made a bunch of edits, and in 5 minutes, I had the C# version of the exact same test running. And so I essentially saved probably half a day trying to figure out the syntax and everything around it, right? So that's definitely kind of the case, right? But it is it's definitely kind of improving the developer productivity. I wouldn't say, like, there's also a lot of hyperbole around, like, it's going to replace developers. I really don't think so. It's going to be more like your co-pilot in day-to-day work, things that you never enjoyed working, right? Nobody likes writing, figuring out how to write this, specific set of unit tests, or how do you kind of solve a particular problem algorithmically. And you used to kind of go to internet, search for the best answers and everything. Now it has cut short the process, right? And in overall improving the developer productivity, you can essentially focus a lot more on the problem, the business problem that you are trying to solve, rather than trying to figure out the integrities and things around it, right? That somebody else can solve it for you.
I think that makes a good point. Just last week, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, we had a conversation about design-led thinking, and this was more or less in the hospitality space. But the guest we had, or one of the co-hosts, was Sandra Vasquez, also of Encora, who heads the user UX experience and design. And she was talking about how she's excited about artificial intelligence, and in this case, genAI, because it allows her to focus on what's fun, or to focus on what's challenging, right? And not these boring things. And I think to your point, okay, so I have it in Python, now I need it in C#. It doesn't mean you don't know C#. You have to know C# because you've got to go in there,
Yes.
You've got to double check it, you've got to make sure that it's functioning. But it frees up, I think, this headspace to be creative and maybe like, oh, that's good, but we could make it better if, right?
That's right.
That's super fun. Have you been, you've been doing that, Viren? Your team's been doing that? Rodrigo, how's this played out perhaps at Encora as well?
I mean, it's like having this expert sitting next to you. It's kind of, this pair programming, approach where you can, as Viren was saying, ask anything. And you might as well get the right answers, but you really need to know what you're doing so that you can get that productivity gain from the tool itself. And you can also, leverage some of their capabilities to release some of the work. For example, creating boilerplate code, as Viren was saying. Unit tests is something that developers usually don't like doing, and that affects overall quality. So, really understanding the capabilities of the tools and how and where you can use them to be more effective. I think it's been a challenge for us. And there's a ramp up, period where people start, developers, seniors start to get to know the tool, what are the capabilities, how to talk to that tool, and what they can achieve. And it takes some time for them to really become more productive. And so I have another question for Viren, and it's actually along that same line. Is in which areas have you seen the most productivity gains when leveraging these tools? Because at least from our side, we've seen that obviously there is a variation between the productivity gains that you can get depending on the actual domain that you work on, language, frameworks, and obviously that will also depend on the tool that you deploy.
Yeah. I think a similar experience, right? Like, there's definitely productivity gain when it comes to, specific language or the framework specific questions and problems that you are trying to solve, right? As you say, right, it is basically, it's an AI driven approach to pair programming. You have a question, you can ask somebody, and, usually you get decent enough answer that you can polish it up. Of course, you need to know what you are doing. You can't just copy paste it and use it. There potentially could also be other regulatory and compliance issue depending upon the industry that you are working on. The other area that I'm starting to kind of explore, I haven't spent a lot of kind of efforts yet on, is like, sometimes you end up with the massive amount of logs from multiple systems, leveraging genAI to kind of get some insights into it, right? To see, what's happening, do we spot? I mean, there have been kind of systems and products for anomaly detection out there for a while now, but if genAI can do something better there in terms of being a little bit more proactive without really defining what those signals are and automatically identify those signals. But that's something that's still trying to, work through it and see, how far can it, work. And it also be cost effective, right? Using genAI tooling right now is also very expensive for a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Because it goes, sorry, go ahead, Anna.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that it goes beyond code generation. you just made an excellent point right there. I mean, with GenAI, you can plug in logs and do some root cause analysis. You can, try to understand the underlying code and see if you can get recommendations on how to improve that, how to reduce technical debt. So it goes beyond specific tools such as Copilot, Code Whisperer, and it enables a team to kind of consolidate a set of tools, a toolkit, an AI toolkit that will allow them to be more effective and increase the productivity along very different lines beyond just code generation and quality assurance. Anna.
Yeah, I was thinking that these tools have way more capabilities, and now that we have them, something that I have thought on it, you have this huge trajectory, Myron. So I wanted to ask if you ever consider like how it will be if you will have these tools, like I don't know, in another of your projects, for example, when you were working at Google or with a Firebase. I don't know. Have you ever thought on how it will be if you have those tools at the moment? How it will change the way that you manage those projects at the time?
So like companies like Google and all, they already have been using AI, machine learning for their internal tooling for quite some time. Because managing the massive amount of data without some sort of intelligence is just almost impossible. But when I think about my prior experiences, certainly, like I remember building a lot of dashboards for executives and entire systems for it, right? Just so that they can get answers to some of the questions around, like what about my, so in one, just to give you some background, right? In finance, the timing of the data is extremely important. When you get your reference data from various exchanges, your trades and everything, and oftentimes, as what you can predict, right, there are delays, and that delays can have very cascading effects. So, top of the line question for every executive, is like, are the data getting delayed? And if so, where is the root cause and where the delays are? Is it on our side or on the partner side, where it is? And I remember kind of building and, a lot of tooling around those things. When I think about something like GenAI, potentially it could have had impact there in terms of being able to kind of make it much more simpler. I would not be surprised if they already are using it now or exploring, or they are starting to see the products around that thing. So yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting. I think that from what I'm understanding, it sort of leans into this other side of what we wanted to talk about today, and that's the business workflows, right? I think up till now, we focused a lot on the coding side and the creation, but have you seen this impact the business side, the understanding of where we are, where we want to go, or maybe how do you see that playing out if it's not already happening?
I think it's early, but the signs are there. What happens a lot of times is there is always this question, like, and probably we have all been through that, is, some business executive comes and says, explain to me how this entire process works. And then you have to go to the whiteboard and explain and show everything. So, there is definitely that aspect of it where, you can leverage GenAI to explain, how everything is kind of wired up, probably, make it a lot more business friendly. So that's one thing that is interesting. We are kind of exploring that area as well to see, how that can be happening. Other thing is, there's always this loss of translation, right? Let's say you are building a brand new business application. So, the business has a specific need that gets translated by a business analyst into a requirements document. So usually it's a Word doc or Google doc that gets handed over to a development team that gets translated into design. So there are, like, multiple touch points, and every place there is a potential for loss of fidelity and misinterpretation, right? And then you have to kind of work backwards once you implement and make sure that everything is addressed that way, and that takes a lot of time. Which is why a seemingly very simple form-based application could take months to develop and multiple developers to do that. But one area where GenAI can potentially help out is you take the requirements, give me the actual business workflows, and that can be directly used by developers to build. and cut short and make it a little bit more productive, right? If not a little bit, quite a bit, lot more productive. I don't think we are there yet, but I think that's an interesting place to be.
It is interesting, and I think even just learning, like we've talked about, the prompts that you're putting in, and even giving you this ability to ask questions or to know what you don't know, I think, which is going to help us build better products and come up to that subject matter expert, let's say, level a lot faster and get hyper focused and specialized in one business area, not just on the tech side of it, but the business side. I love it.
I truly believe that genAI has democratized the access to AI. You were mentioning before, Viren, that big tech companies have been using AI for a long period of time. And what genAI enables is that most companies, even small companies, even individuals, can leverage the potential of AI technologies to be more efficient, to know more, to do things differently, and to reshape how they do things and their organizations do things. And that brings a huge question: where to start? Both as an individual and if you're leading an organization, how would you go about, starting to deploy these tools effectively but responsibly as well?
Yeah, I think that's probably $1 million question, right? Because there is the cost aspect of it. Most of these models are pretty large, requires a lot of GPUs to run. So you just can't roll it out to thousands of users in an organization without really thinking about the cost aspect of it. Second is also, if you want to use a public model through a public API, then there is definitely questions about risk and compliance that you need to be very much careful and aware about, and exactly what kind of questions that you ask. Even if you fine tune and run a private model, the interesting thing about, we have all heard about hallucinations. I think there are these days kind of models have been kind of improving enough that you can control the amount of hallucinations that you do. There have been kind of very smart prompt engineering tricks. But I would classify this question into kind of probably 3 categories, right? One is how you deploy as an infrastructure, right? Which is where the cost, the necessary infrastructure comes into picture, right? Do you have right level of infra? If you are running everything on-prem, do you have GPUs available? Nobody thought about running GPUs on data centers before. So, can you acquire them enough? And also the availability, right? It's not easy. If you want to deploy 1,000 GPUs tomorrow, it might take a while. And of course, the cost implication. Second part is, the compliance, safety, risk aspect of it, how you are going to monitor the usage of these things, right? I would not be surprised if there are requirements in a very heavily regulated industry that every conversation with a Gen AI model has to be logged so that it can be further audited later on. And if not already, it is probably one incident away before this becomes a regulatory requirement that it has to be done that. And then third part is, how do you make it easy for developers to kind of use the models in a safe way? Typically what you would do, for example, let's say if you have a database which contains financial information, you protect the database with username, password, and only give access to the people who have access to it. If you have a fine-tuned model, you probably want to do the exact same thing so that you don't go around asking a question, hey, give me the last quarter or what's our current run rate for the company, right? And maybe you are not qualified enough to ask that question. So how do you protect? So even internally, being able to access and control the access to the data and the model. Also, if you have built a system that can go and ask questions to various databases, how do you ensure that I can only ask a question to a database that I have access to and not something that I don't have access to? So then there goes all of these things. And so the part of that is it's a combination of, in my opinion, the entire new discipline of prompt engineering, making sure that the prompts are not prone to attacks. The second part is just operationalizing these things, right, in your development flow. How are you going to do it? I think it's one of the areas where we see a lot of new startups, new kind of tooling that is coming out for developers to make it easy. And the final piece, which is where I think we kind of fit very nicely is the entire interaction with Gen AI model is asynchronous. So now suddenly you have to start thinking about asynchronous programming, like long running programs and workflows and all. How are you going to build that? Do you have the necessary infrastructure to do that or not before you can start using it? Yeah.
I think that's really great. And I think coming back to the heart of who you are at Orkes and how your goal is just to make lives of developers easier. My question is, with this $1 million question and these 3 items that you've lined out, what's your take in terms of democratizing this and also monetizing this? If someone or if you were to unlock one of these ahas, I found this works really well to solve one of these 3 challenges, right, with utilizing GenAI. What have you found that balance between democratization and monetization, or what camp are you in?
Yeah, I think one thing that Rodrigo mentioned very well, right, is one thing that GenAI has done is definitely democratize the access to the GenAI models. Like, everyone right now has access to extremely powerful language models. So that part has kind of been democratized in some ways, or it is getting more and more democratized. We are also starting to see models which are, smaller, very specialized, and you can find a lot of them in open source. So, if I just want a code generation, I don't care about everything else, right? Then I can have a smaller model. People are also working on, being able to run the models on your phone. So, it can run on a device as well, or in the browser, for example. So that the core infrastructure part is kind of already democratized or getting more and more democratized. I think the challenge right now is on the other 2 part, right? Like, how do you safely incorporate in your kind of application development flow, and how do you also make it easy for your kind of developers to be able to use it, right? Like, if you think about a company with 10,000 developers, and if you were to go and train each and every one of them, that's a lot of investment that we are talking about, not just in terms of money, but also time. Money you can borrow, time you cannot borrow, right? So that's one thing that I always say, that it has to be something that works well with how your workforce is trained to operate, and just able to use it with minimal amount of time and investment done.
Thank you. We're coming down to the final few minutes of our show today, and I know that you have a question for Viren that's near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, it is. So this is a really personal question, I guess. But as a young woman in the STEM field, I have seen that there is like a limited participation for women in technology. Do you think that somehow GenAI can help us to level the playing field for us in here?
I think so. Like, going back to the point on the democratization, right? One thing it also means is, let's say if you want to learn a new technology or a framework, you have kind of a lot more tooling available without necessarily having to figure out and spend money on time on those things. So there is definitely potential for kind of Gen AI to make a lot of impact on how women or even underrepresented communities are able to kind of get there much quicker. Like, as I keep saying, right, time is one thing that is very hard to kind of gain. And when you are kind of trying to juggle across multiple responsibilities, and if you already have a job and trying to figure out the new tech and everything, this is where one area where Gen AI definitely can help. And yeah, I mean, the co-pilot is amazing, right, from that perspective. Being able to kind of dive deeper into new frameworks, languages, enhance the skill sets.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you make a good point in terms of balancing time with this co-pilot and just making it more accessible for women as a time saver. And not only that, to have that co-pilot with you at any time, right? It doesn't have to be this 9 to 5. It could be, I'm available to work on this or upskill myself at 5 a.m. or 10 o'clock p.m. and that works. And I think it's also an interesting point in terms of prompt engineering, which is conversational, right? And women tend to be more conversational and even better at it than men. And so I think that maybe this even leans into the strengths in terms of even getting it a lot faster, of being able to ask the right questions, garbage in, garbage out. And maybe there's an advantage there. I don't know.
Yeah.
Perfect. Final question for you, Viren, as we wrap up today. Any words of wisdom that you'd like to leave our audience with in terms of co-founding and what's maybe worked for you, maybe hasn't, and what you might counsel others to follow suit in or to avoid?
Yeah, I think starting a company is a very personal choice, in my opinion. And it's also a very interesting career decision, right? Because you the most important thing that you have to be comfortable with is uncertainty. You never know where things are going to go. You might think that no, you are going to just go on a hockey stick graph, become a unicorn, and have a successful exit in 2 years, and there could be completely different external events that could drive how your company operates, right? There's nothing you can do about it. So that's definitely one thing that you have to be absolutely comfortable with, uncertainty and dealing with ambiguity all the time, wearing multiple hats. At the same time, what has worked for me, and I think is interesting, is it forces you out of your comfort zone. So if you are, let's say, a programmer or a systems developer, now you have to think about sales, you have to think about marketing, you have to think about everything that goes around with running a company, and you have to make tough decisions. So that's a learning experience. In the end, it can be extremely rewarding, not in terms of monetary aspect, but just in terms of the experiences, right? Life experiences that you can share with your friends and family for the rest of your life, that, hey, this is how it happened, and whatever. It doesn't have to be a successful exit, right? That experience alone itself is amazing. So I mean, that definitely has been kind of my experience so far. But at the same time, it's not about there's a lot of uncertainty, right? Absolutely.
Thank you. I think that is extremely wise on your part. Thank you again, Viren, so much for sharing your story, Orkes story with us, and of course, your take on genAI and what that means for how software is being built. And Rodrigo, Anna, thank you for joining me along on the ride.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, and thank you, Viren, for spending time with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Stick around for just a moment as we go off air. But before we do, I would like to remind our audience that we did have a show on the docket for tomorrow that has been postponed due to, yes, the winter season and getting a little under the weather. But our show for Thursday is still ready to go. That's going to be the third part of our 5-part series that we're doing with Provision Partners on doing more in 24 and how to get started implementing with AI. This one is going to be from design-led thinking to implementing real-world AI solutions. So join me at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific, along with David Chesler, Provision President, and Martin Chevali, who is CEO of Inspire. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you then.